The Great Wall of China. 6,259 kilometers of stone, 359 kilometers of trenches, and 2,232 kilometers of natural defensive barriers, such as hills and rivers. The first sections of the wall were built as early as the 7th century BC, but most of what we now know as one of the great wonders of the world was modified and rebuilt around 400 to 700 years ago during the Ming dynasty. An interesting period in Chinese history, the Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644. Referred to by many historians as one of the greatest eras of orderly government and social stability in human history, the Ming dynasty was the last imperial dynasty ruled by ethnic Han Chinese. They were also the ones who initially expelled the ruling Mongol Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan, grandson to Genghis Khan, from China. During this period, between the 14th and 17th century, the Ming revived the Great Wall and used it as a primary defense against the Mongols, who tried more than once to recapture the land. The very first walls were built as normal fortifications to defend Chinese city-states from both raiding Eurasian steppe nomads to the north, Genghis Khan's predecessors and whatnot, as well as other Chinese city-states who would constantly war with each other. Only later, in 221 BC, when China was fully unified under Qin Shi Huang, literally translated as the first emperor of China, would the walls between city-states be torn down, and all north-facing walls would be connected for the purpose of defending China from the tribes to the north. And as soon as it became one large wall with guard towers and smoke signals and resting points running east to west along the northern border of China, it ended up being used for more than just border defense. Merchants and travelers could now use the wall for safe transportation, and the state could better maintain control over the import and export of goods. The wall served as one of the world's first great highways, something of a prototype to the Silk Road, both of which actually grew and evolved together, with the prosperity from the Silk Road trade helping the Han dynasty construct the wall, and the wall in turn protecting parts of the trading route. But the reason I'm making this video isn't just to tell you about Central and East Asian history or this one giant wall built over centuries of a shifting geopolitical landscape. As you can imagine, the story is longer than the wall itself. But I think we've covered the basics. The Chinese built the Great Wall to defend their territory and trading routes from raiding nomadic steppe peoples. What I want to talk about is a sort of generational political cycle which I've never been able to stop thinking about ever since I heard Dan Carlin talk about it on his series called Wrath of the Khans. If you haven't listened to that series or don't know who Dan Carlin is, you're doing yourself a disservice. But I'll do my best to explain the idea now in my own words. So, the tribes of the Eurasian steppe, those barbarians who the Chinese were defending against, were nomadic. They followed the seasons and migration of herd animals and constantly warred with each other over land and territory disputes. The Eurasian steppe, also called the Great Steppe, or just the steppes, stretches from modern-day Romania and Moldova through Ukraine, Kazakhstan, parts of Russia, and all the way over to Mongolia. It's characterized by a vast expanse of grasslands and savannas bound by mountains and forests to the north, and dry, arid desert to the south. The specific geographical features of the Great Steppe make it an incredibly harsh place to live for a long list of interesting reasons, but I won't let myself get sidetracked by that. All the various peoples who lived across this massive territory throughout history tended to have a few things in common. They all seemed to possess almost supernatural abilities to ride horses, and more, fight from horseback with devastating success. Their way of life on the steppe had them taming and riding horses their entire lives, and much of the Mongol success with Genghis Khan can be contributed to this factor alone. They were known as some of the deadliest warriors on horseback in history. In fact, I think it's fair to say Genghis Khan's Mongols were the deadliest warriors in all of human history. Now, just picture the wise, settled Chinese city-states perpetually building walls and fortifications to keep these barbarians from raiding their great temples and destroying all their brilliant wisdom and traditions. The Chinese and the Mongols were much like yin and yang, as a Taoist monk might argue. Chaos and order, we might say. And understand that Kublai Khan's Mongols weren't the first tribe from the steppe to successfully penetrate a Chinese wall and establish control over the territory. Back even further than the 7th century BC, when the first walls were being built, the land was constantly disputed, and the list of new dynasties that rose and fell is more than a person could research in a lifetime. We're talking pretty much about the entire history of Chinese and Eurasian steppe relations. I'm just covering the most basic of basics here in order to make a point. And here's the point. That generational cycle that I was referring to, and I've never been able to stop thinking about, the whole point really for making this video, was that the fierce and mighty steppe people would conquer the Chinese land and take control of their cities, but they were never really able to hold a city for more than 2 or 3 generations. What would often happen wasn't a rebellion or a recapture by the Chinese, but rather other Eurasian steppe groups would come and take the cities from the former steppe people, now civilized by Chinese culture. Apparently this happened as a cycle for hundreds of years in that area, but I can't say I've researched every single case, so I'm mostly just trusting that Dan Carlin knows what he's talking about. The reason I find this all so interesting though is, these fierce steppe peoples who first conquered those first Chinese cities lost everything that made them fierce over just a generation or two. The civilized ways and comforts of Chinese city life provided to the next generation from birth, who didn't grow up on the steppe and didn't have that same supernatural ability to ride a horse in a battle, made those people incapable of defending themselves from the other steppe people, who had maintained their nomadic and harsher way of life. It's simple really, predictable. It's a point about cyclical nature and history, but also a point about how the comforts of civilization and perceived safety can weaken a population of people. Too much yin, not enough yang. And it wasn't just the Chinese and steppe peoples who experienced this phenomenon. The Roman Empire followed the same sort of pattern for many years leading up to its actually becoming an empire, and again as it broke apart. Great Romans like Julius Caesar would lead expeditions into the north to pacify the Gallic and Germanic tribes, who were to the Romans what the Mongols were to the Chinese. But once that threat was neutralized and the Roman people were afforded the luxury of safety from foreign threats, they became a pretty degenerate bunch, to say the least. Maybe in another video I'll talk about the Roman political cycles, the early years of conquest and expansion into the debauchery of Commodus and Caligula, the military reformations of Gaius Marius, and the Great Roman Wall built in 122 in Britain, the long, drawn-out death of the empire, etc. These are all topics that would only serve to fortify my point in some way. And those are just 2 examples, the Chinese and the Romans. This is not a unique phenomenon, I assure you. But this video can't be 15,000 years long, so I'll get to the point. It's as if the world is standing still and we're just a giant wave oscillating back and forth across its surface. A splash in terms of geological time, but a nice structured wave at our scale. I wonder if my country, Canada, and the West in general, aren't approaching that trough in the wave, that low point of weakness and gullibility, pampered by the comforts and safety of the first world and the new age of technology, and incapable of defending and maintaining our civilization. I wonder if we aren't heading toward a natural collapse under the weight of our vast empire, and I really wonder if there might be a way that we can avoid it. So, thanks for listening. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts, or to follow along with my other endeavors. I appreciate every person who listens.